So a few weeks ago, there was the most extensive vaccine trial ever done by the Danes. 1.7 million lives over 37 years, looking at side effects of vaccine, and they didn't find any, right? Basically, vaccines are very safe, and this article proved it. I happen to be one of the reviewers of that article, and one of the principal author, I'm going to have a chance to welcome as a new member of the National Academy of Medicine in October. He's the second Dane that's been inducted into the National Academy for his work. It was really interesting. RFK told the journal that published it, which is the Annals of Internal Medicine by the American College of Physicians, without any reasoning why, to retract it. They didn't, but I just found it really fascinating. Back, some years ago now, there was a famous article that was published in the Annals in Nature and in Lancet, a British journal, by a scientist who wrote about autism, relationship between autism and vaccinations. The article was retracted from the Lancet, and the author had his license taken away. It turned out the data was entirely faked, A, and B, he was funded by a law firm that was suing on behalf of parents for kids with autism. And interestingly enough, that same article is what RFK continues to raise as of today in terms of the issues around vaccine. So I happen to have been privileged. I sit on the National Vaccine Advisory Committee of the National Academy of Medicine. I've done that for many years. And I happen to have been privileged enough many, many years ago, early in my career, to be part of the hepatitis trials that approved hepatitis B vaccine. And that has resulted in something really interesting. We have reduced hepatocellular carcinoma of the liver in Taiwan and in China by 72%. It was one of the most common causes of cancer in those Asian communities. The community in the world that had the highest rate of hepatocellular carcinoma in the world were Native Alaskans. And they had the highest rate of childhood hepatocellular carcinoma, people who got hepatocellular carcinoma before they turned 21. And we've gone from them being the highest rate in the world to zero. We have no more hepatocellular carcinoma. We also have been very effective in reducing cervical cancer and other types of cancers that spread by the papillomavirus. Most cervical cancers are caused by a papillomavirus. We now have a vaccine that's effective against Duracell. It's effective against 9 different strains of that particular virus, which is one of the strains causes the common wart that many people have during their life. But it's interesting. We reduced the number of women with cervical cancer if they got the vaccination prior to the age of, or if they got it at 17, by 72%. And if they got it at 14, we reduced it by 92%. So it tells you that there might be some sexual activity between 14 and 17, perhaps, or there might be some strains of that particular virus that are not covered by the 9 that are in the Duracell, because it's not 100%. But vaccines have been just such an effective, probably the most effective scientific intervention that we've had since Jennings developed the cowpox vaccine to eliminate smallpox. But I don't want to read off the slide, but it's been just a tremendous, difficult time for those of us who know something about vaccines or are involved in the vaccine in vaccine care, to see Florida basically tell the school systems that vaccines are no longer mandatory for school. I was sitting next to somebody in a meeting. It was a meeting by the county health department, head of the county health department, last week, and the issue of the right to not be vaccinated was raised in that conversation. And the person sitting next to me said, "We have individual rights." We don't. The laws around vaccine and the laws around quarantine are the good of the public, right? It's why we call it public health. So, you know, that this whole argument about I have an individual right not to be vaccinated, you know, brings up the right, as pointed out in that little slide, the right to transmit disease, right? I mean, the whole concept of preventing disease is that, you know, you have an obligation as a member, a citizen of the school, of the country, to not be a vector to transmit disease. And we've seen many cases now in the past decade of outbreaks of measles, right? Measles is one of the most transmissible of the infectious disease. The most transmissible, by the way, is chickenpox. Chickenpox vaccine is another thing that's come along since since I was a kid. I had chickenpox. You know, we think that might be related to some types of rare cancer as well. It's a vaccine that lives with us our whole lives once we have it. And so, I mean, that's a thing. So, vaccines work by training the immune system it's a really interesting, you know, our nature, our evolution, who we are, who we've evolved as, you know, we've over the millions of years that we've evolved into what we are, our immune system has evolved to sort of protect us against various diseases. And so when we're exposed to a disease, we develop immunity against it. And with many viruses, we're unlikely to ever get that virus again because we're now immune from it. So if we can fake the body into believing that they have been exposed to it by creating some training of the immune system to produce antibodies, to produce the parts of the immune system that remember and recognize that you've been exposed to that. That's how a vaccine works. It builds memory in your body to hopefully a disease that you've not been exposed to but have the potential of being exposed to. That memory has eradicated completely one of the terrible diseases that existed early in my lifetime, which is smallpox. We were very close to eradicating polio, and we actually saw the first case of transmission of polio in the United States, and I think about 40 years. It happened to be imported, but that imported case transmitted to somebody else in Louisiana. So that's the first time we've seen polio transmitted in the United States. So we talked about this already, but really it's designed to protect the community as well as the individual and hopefully to eradicate diseases. I happen to be a member of the Rotary Club, and we've been very active in trying to do polio eradication. So, can everybody read this? So the COVID vaccine that is currently available, and the new vaccine has just come out, and I happen to be at Kaiser, and my vaccination will be prepared by tomorrow, and I will go get it. It's a very effective vaccine for this season, and we know that the vaccines have been COVID has been very, very successful in decreasing the amount of deaths and the amount of hospitalizations. It's not 100%, but you're much less likely to either be hospitalized or die or have a serious complication or long-term complications by a factor of 13.7. So it's pretty effective. The other interesting developments that we're seeing in influenza is that we're going to be starting our first trial in 2026 of a more universal influenza vaccine. The current influenza vaccine is designed by trying to identify the vaccine that's circulating in the southern hemisphere before it hits us in the northern hemisphere, and identifying the 3 or 4 most likely candidates for that, growing the protein, the surface protein of that, inside of eggs, and then making a guess that if we put those 3 together, we will more than likely prevent a lot of illness and disease. If you're a senior now, the current vaccine that you're eligible for, if you're 65 or over, has 5 strains in it. And it's called a multipotent vaccine. And when I just got mine this week at Kaiser, because I'm over 65, I got the multivalent one. But there is some hope. We've been working on it for a long time, and they're going to be doing their first pilots in it with antibodies directed not at the surface antigen, but at deeper parts of the virus, the part of the viruses that don't change. So flu is really, really good at drifting. So the surface antigens, they've evolved to change as quickly as they can so that animals and humans don't develop immunity to it. Influenza there's strains of influenza in everything from whales to birds, right? And what really happens, that really, I mean, the influenza that killed 50 million people in the 1918 outbreak was one that developed in birds, and somehow it was close enough to the human strains that it quickly jumped into humans. And it's really interesting in that it attacked and killed people, not the youngest and the oldest, but the middle-aged people, and 50 million people died of that outbreak. The other vaccine that's really, really good, and has been recently developed, and I would recommend for anybody here in their 60s plus, is the respiratory syncytial virus vaccination. That is one of the most common causes of death and serious illness in tiny kids, right? Because their airways are such that they close off with RSV. They've now developed a very effective vaccination that's given to mothers when they're pregnant. Because that first 6 months of life, you really can't give a kid a vaccine and get the kind of response that you would see in somebody that's a little bit more mature. So they give it to women who are pregnant. And so we're optimistic that we're really going to decrease the complication. But also we as seniors are much more likely to have serious consequences of RSV. So slightly different strain that's been developed for us as seniors. We are now also looking at a messenger RNA vaccination, which is a really interesting development that's also likely to be more universal with a whole range of coronaviruses, including the current one that we're worried about, but also SARS, a previous one that we were worried about a couple of decades ago. They're in the same family of viruses. And similar to the flu, we're looking at attacking not the surface antigen, but deeper in the protein. And that's been very positive. The folks who are leading at that are the Walter Reed Research Institute in Bethesda. And they have, I think they're pretty successful. So I'm optimistic that we're there for that too. This is some of the vaccinations that I'm really excited about coming along. The one I'm most excited about is malaria. I grew up in Sierra Leone. I had malaria multiple times, including black water fever. It's no fun. But we are now vaccinating in many parts of Africa and Asia where malaria is common, and it's very effective, particularly in children, right? That's our biggest worry. We've been vaccinating in significant levels in endemic regions beginning about a year ago. The meningococcal vaccination is a concern. You know, we see those kinds of outbreaks in recruits in the military. We see them in college campuses. Terrible disease, a high fatality rate. We have approved, as of February this year, the first ever 5-in-1 conjugate vaccination. So there's multiple strains of it. We had a vaccination that was pretty good against 2 of the most common ones. We now have one that's effective against the 5 most common strains. So we're hopeful that we're going to have an impact. The other one that I'm really excited about is that, you know, in the United States, the tuberculosis vaccine, which is used in most of the rest of the world, but not here. And the reason why it's not used here, this rate of effectiveness is so low. It's a very old vaccine. It goes back to Pasteur's time, BCG. But we want, since the tuberculosis rate is pretty low here, we don't want to mask the ability to detect whether you have tuberculosis or not with a tuberculosis test, right? So we don't give the vaccination so that we can monitor it. And it's because the rate of cover is so low. The new vaccination that's now out, the M72, has much more potential of reducing tuberculosis. We think that it's going to be effective at about the 50% or slightly higher rate.
Drug-resistant TB, because I saw a lot of those kinds of patients when I'm in my career.
Yeah.
There were a lot of them in DC.
Tuberculosis. Oh, yeah. The question was tuberculosis resistance to antibiotics. And that's a huge, huge problem universally in the world. We have a significant percentage of tuberculosis cases are resistant to most known antibiotics now. When I spent time with the State Department in South Africa, when somebody had tuberculosis, they were put in the hospital and monitored for 6 months. And the reason why they were monitored was to make sure they took their drug so that resistance wouldn't develop. We don't do that in many places, but you know, I read a report recently that in one of the prisons in Siberia, there was a tuberculosis rate of 92%, right? And almost all of it was resistant, right? Yeah, it's a huge problem. Tuberculosis is a huge problem. It's probably one of the biggest killers in the world, right? We don't hear about it too much in this country, but it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, yeah. And there's a bunch of optimism, too, that with AI and its ability to look at patterns, folding patterns of proteins, we're optimistic that there are some new antibiotics that might be effective down the pike recently against tuberculosis, but it's a huge problem. Thanks for the question. So, you know the Nipah virus? Anybody heard of the Nipah virus? The Navajo Indians that were dying a decade or so ago. It's a virus that's spread by flea, and it's a very serious illness in the developing world, which I suppose is like the Navajo reservation, maybe, in terms of how we've created that. But there's also a very effective vaccine that we think is probably in the 50 to 70% effective range, and trials are starting in Bangladesh in 2026. So, you know, there's some optimism in terms of vaccine development, ongoing vaccine development. And it really breaks my heart that the Trump administration has just basically taken all the research dollars out of vaccine development in the United States. There are other countries that are stepping up, however. I mean, the UK, Denmark, Norway, and some other countries are trying to step up to continue to fund that effort. I went the wrong way, I think. Am I going the wrong way? I think I'm going the wrong way. So I talked about prevention of cancer with some of the vaccines, particularly the HPV vaccine and hepatitis B. There's been a tremendous amount of work in the past few years about treatment of cancer with vaccinations. Maybe have you heard about it? I happen to have chronic leukemia, myelofibrosis, and I was in a trial over the past 2 years at Mount Sinai, where they were taking a protein to try to train my T cells to attack the surface of that particular antigen. You remember hearing about Jimmy Carter surviving his melanoma that was metastatic to his brain. That was a vaccine-induced training system to train the human immune system to recognize and more effectively attack the tumor. And they basically, with mRNA, we can basically take an individual who has a particular type of tumor, either blood tumor or solid tumor, take that tumor out of the individual, take that antigen, and then expose it to the person's T cells and develop like a whole army of T cells in a vase, and then inject that back into the person to attack. And that's looking very promising. So it's also, I think, going to be quite effective against, and one of our big hopes in more effective treatment of cancer down the road. So, you know, that's a pretty exciting technology that's coming down the pike. So this is basically the way that works. You know, you take the tumor and healthy tissue, you sequence it, you multiply it, amplify it, and then inject that back as the vaccine into the human, into the person to attack the cancer. So the last thing I want to go over is the vaccinations you should be getting as a senior and why. Again, the COVID-19 vaccine that's now out as of September, I strongly encourage all of you to get it. Fortunately, for those of us who are 62 or over or have one of any multiple disease factors, we're all approved for that. The flu vaccine, again, you want to get the dose for the older adults if you're 60 or over. RSV vaccine for older adults, 2 doses. If you haven't gotten that, I highly recommend it. There is a very effective vaccine. The pneumonia was called the old person's friend, right? We used to all die of pneumonia instead of other chronic diseases. There's two types of vaccines. There's the 13 and the 23. I won't go into the numbers, but if you've not had the 23 yet, you should get that as well. The 13 was an older one, and that's pretty effective. Tetanus, diphtheria, whooping cough. If you haven't had that in 10 years, you should get a booster of that. And yes. If you've not had a booster of the basically childhood, yeah, and shingles. Has everybody here got their shingles vaccine? Wonderful, great news. That's a terrible disease. It's really miserable, and the new vaccine is 97% effective. If you've gotten it say 7 years or so prior to this, go get the new booster, right? Because the new strain is the old strain was about 35 to 40% effective. The new one is 97% effective. So that's the discussion. The questions, thoughts, Larry?
What was the buzz?
What's that?
You had B-U-T in big letters. The flu vaccine. Every year, but.
Oh, the but is that we're hopeful that the new vaccine will be the multivalent vaccine that's tailored against deeper tissue. We're not going to have to do it every year, hopefully. But the pilot hasn't even started yet. It's going to start in 26. So that's the but.
Or should we wait until?
Oh, you should get it. This is the beginning of the flu season. We're not seeing a big activity. In fact, I just talked to the Commissioner of Health last week, and the flu activity is pretty low right now. So sometime prior to the end of October, you should get it. I mean, it's going to be effective. If you get it now, it'll last you through the season. The other thing about flu vaccine, which is really interesting, is that each year you get different strains, and those strains will stay. The memory of the individual strains will stay with you. So even if you get flu, the strain is a little bit not quite close enough, and you get a little bit of flu, it's not going to be likely to hospitalize you or kill you if there's some memory from 5 years ago of a strain that was similar to that. So it continues to multiply in you over the years.
You probably saw the Senate committee meeting of...
Can I try this one?
You can.
Might have to turn it on.
You probably saw the Senate committee meeting with the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Is that true?
That's why I brought the little parody, because I did see it.
One of the female senators told the secretary that he was a charlatan. What was your reaction to that?
Oh, he's a charlatan. I mean, yes. I mean, this is terrible. I mean, the very fact that this guy would use as evidence, you know, a person who wrote a paper that was not only retracted, but the guy lost his license over it, and he still uses that, means he's a charlatan. I mean, he's a fake. You know, he's sad. I don't know, but you know, the core debate, you know, getting down to the core debate. The core debate is individual rights versus public rights. And you know, you've got lots of people who think nobody can tell me what I should do. I don't want my kids vaccinated because I have the right to say no. Well, you don't. Now you do in Florida.
General George Washington, during the founding of our nation, he ordered his Continental Army to get the smallpox vaccine. I can only wonder what General Washington would have said to any soldier that said, I have my rights. I'm not going to take the smallpox vaccine.
Well, that got played out, you know, with COVID, when you had a number of folks in the Air Force and Army that refused to get the vaccination, and they were, you know, in a previous administration, they were relieved from duty, right? I'm sure now that they would be told they'd be given a medal, probably. Yeah. Yeah.
I've taken a picture of your screen so I'll know what vaccines I need to go get. But I'm curious about the RSV. I took that 8 years ago when my first granddaughter was born. Do I need to do it again?
The RSV vaccine from 8 years ago should still be effective. I would check in another couple of years, but the RSV vaccine that you got 8 years ago should still protect you. What's that? No, yeah, 2 doses, sorry. So you didn't get 2 doses? Get another dose, yeah.
What about hepatitis?
they can hear it?
Yes, I'm asking, what about a hepatitis? What about a hepatitis vaccine? It doesn't kill many people, I guess, but a lot of people get it.
Yeah, so there are many kinds of hepatitis. There's A, B, C, D, probably an E. And hepatitis D is the one that was probably the most fatal, and that's the one that's associated with hepatocellular carcinoma. That's the one that we have a very effective vaccine against. The other type of immunity that you have access to is in essence somebody else's serum. And if you're going into an area where there's high levels of hepatitis A, which is, by the way, foodborne spread, hepatitis B is spread the same way that it's sexually transmitted, bloodborne transmitted disease. Hepatitis A is foodborne, so you can get passive immunity, immune globulin, if you're going into an area where there's a high level of hepatitis A. Hepatitis C, we now have effective treatment for that, but I don't think we have a vaccination that I'm aware of. That's also sexually transmitted, bloodborne transmitted disease. Does that answer that? But hepatitis, it's interesting. Hepatitis, I was involved in a study. The very first trials that we did for hepatitis B was we got people who were gay in the gay community to volunteer to give plasma, and we isolated the hepatitis B vaccine. We killed the vaccine, we extracted the coat, and that's the vaccine that we started the trials with. And it was military recruits that were given that vaccination. They had to be volunteers, but that turned out to be effective. Since then, we actually have taken the protein for that particular coat of the hepatitis B, and we put it in human cell line, and that produces it like brewing yeast, right? So it's no longer derived from.
Yes, I was speaking to somebody younger in the congregation before your talk, and he said he was refused. They refused to give him a COVID vaccine. My advice to him was to get a prescription from his doctor, which I think then CVS would have to honor, but I'm not sure. Are they refusing COVID shots to people less than 65?
Yeah, so that's something that's still being worked out because the current guidelines that come out of RFK's office is that anybody over 65 can get it, and anybody with chronic diseases can get it. So if you're obese, if you're diabetic, if you're asthmatic, and there's many, many different reasons why you get it. So in order to get that vaccine, if you have none of those diseases and you're not over 65, is something called off-label. So I, as a physician, can prescribe a vaccine or a treatment to you, quote unquote, off-label. The question is, will the insurance company cover it? I think. I don't know, but that's a good question. I'll look it up. I just don't know the cost of that.
Unfortunately, I can tell you.
Oh, thank you.
Based on investigation by someone at this church, that the number is about $300.
Yeah, that's probably about right. It's worth the $300, by the way. But
I have been in a situation where insurance wouldn't cover something. And what you do, if this happens to you, you go back to the doctor and you say, what would insurance have paid you? And they tell you, and that's what you pay them. Usually they will accept that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
So it's $300 retail,
Yeah.
but you get the wholesale rate the doctor pays if you negotiate with your, the wholesale rate insurance pays if you negotiate with your doctor.
Yeah, by the way, everything in terms of payments and healthcare is negotiable. Keep that in mind. It's yeah. I mean, I I took a year out of medical school and worked on the Carter campaign and then worked in the Carter White House is kind of how I started in this industry. And the reason I did that was because I was convinced that, you know, after 3 years of medical school, that healthcare was a form of violence as a Quaker.
Yes,
You know,
I have another question. What about children and COVID? And it just appalls me, the thought of younger people being refused because they're the ones that are taking care of their elderly parents and they're taking care of children. And I just can't even imagine a more difficult situation when they get COVID, they're going to spread it to the parents, to the children.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. And I'm going to be seeing my 6 great-grandchildren, all of them 4 years and down. Yeah, what do I advise them?
I would try to get vaccinated. I try to get your physician to approve it. I would do everything I could to get it. I think most people will be successful. And if your doctor won't do that, I would try to find another doctor, but that's another story. But I think this is the clearest example I've had in my lifetime that elections matter. I mean, you know, thank you for doing the postcards and all that sort of stuff, but elections matter. Go ahead. He has some phone.
In hearing all this, I just go back to my roots, and that is political activism. We have an administration that just is screwing up right, left, and sideways. And if you call, write, and email your congressmen and senators regularly, they're going to get the message. They're already scared of the next election. And don't let them sit idly by. You have to push them. These people that are elected in the various, well, Kennedy, for instance, they are out to do us in, and we cannot allow it. Be politically active.
Well said. Okay.
If you had the shingles vaccine, say a year or 2 ago, do you still need to get the new vaccine?
It depends on what you got a year or 2 ago. The current vaccine, which has been out probably about 4 years, so you might be covered, is so much better than the older one.
So the one that's
you should
been
check.
out 4 years ago
Yeah,
is probably...
and if you're not sure whether it was the old one or the new one, get another one. I mean, the new one is just, it is a, who's had shingles here? I mean, it is a miserable disease, and you don't want to have it. So, and now that we've got a vaccine that's 90% effective against it, it's such a big breakthrough.
I was confused by what you said earlier about. Oh, I was confused by what you said earlier about healthcare being a form of violence. Did I misunderstand what you said?
No, I think healthcare is a form of violence in this country.
Can
I think
you
the way
explain
it's
that?
delivered is a form of violence.
Ah, the delivery.
Yeah.
In other words, the non-delivery.
It's a milking machine.
The non-delivery is a form
Yeah.
of violence.
When you know, prior to the Affordable Care Act, and I wrote a lot of the language for that, but prior to the Affordable Care Act, you know, we had 53 million people that were uncovered, and the Affordable Care Act has decreased that down to about 20 million. That's still a form of violence.
Thank you for
Yeah.
clarifying that.
I mean, you know, if you don't have health care, you're in trouble, and
Remarkably, I think my pharmacy does a good job of doing this. All right, can you hear me?
I can.
I think my pharmacy does a remarkable job of keeping back of vaccines.
Yeah.
That I was getting the shingles shots, and turns out they kept track of every vaccine I had.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And looked at what I was
And
doing.
they're required to, by the way.
You should, if you use a regular pharmacist regularly, they're a great help in this.
So one of the big fights that I had some 20 so years ago was the doctors insisting that they were the only ones that could prescribe and deliver a vaccination because they made money out of doing the vaccination. And one of the states, the first state that we changed that in was Utah, where I'm an adjunct faculty member there. And what I convinced the insurance companies, the legislatures to do, was to pay the doctors based on what percentage of their population was vaccinated, not giving the vaccination. And all of a sudden, they were happy to have, the pharmacies do it. And so that concept began to transmit. And I think most states, I know certainly in Virginia, most states now that you can get your vaccinations when you do that in the pharmacy, it's so much easier to do, so much simpler, so much less complicated, that the rate of vaccinations go up. Yeah. So that was a big breakthrough, but that was a real difficult uphill battle, as many are in healthcare.
Yeah, one more question. I'm a little bit concerned about scarcity of the vaccine because the pharmacies don't know how much to produce because who's allowed to get it?
That's a huge concern for all of us in the business, right? Of advising around vaccine. Yeah, I mean that's a huge problem, and the cost as well. Hepatitis B, for example. It was $3 in Egypt and $370 in the United States. I mean, it's just the amount of money that's charged for any pharmaceutical or vaccination in the United States can be as many as tenfold what it is in the rest of the world. We have never been able to deal with the devil in the sense that we've allowed some sort of arbitration on what we pay for vaccines because they are the single largest contributor to every member of Congress.
Kaiser Permanente sent me an email recently telling me that they now will be able to administer the COVID-19 vaccine to me starting this coming Monday.
Yeah, I'm going to get mine on Monday. I'll go with you.
And I thought that was marvelous. But I think that all these other vaccines that I have had down through the years, Kaiser Permanente is not going to let me know if I need or I should get the new shingles vaccine. I remember getting the shingles vaccine from Kaiser many years ago, but they're not going to tell me to come in for the shingles vaccine. I believe that we have to be our best advocate for keeping track of our health care.
Yeah.
Even with Kaiser Permanente, which, Paul, I think you think very highly of them, and I think they're doing a pretty good job for me. But if I'm not my own advocate, I am going to just be left just wanting in a number of areas.
I think you're right. And I think also if you look at what Kaiser Permanente's incentives are, is that a butt in a bed is a cost to them and not a profit. Right? Most hospitals, a butt in a bed is a profit to them. And so they're much more likely to be very concerned about you not getting your flu vaccine than not getting your shingles vaccine, because you're going to be miserable with the shingles, but you're not going to be hospitalized. Sorry to be cynical, but yeah.
Paul, I have a question about tick-borne encephalitis. There's a vaccine for that, and I found out from a travel vaccine company in Reston that the cost to get a vaccine was like $1,200 or $1,500. And I couldn't believe it, and I decided just to avoid that particular area on my recent trip to Slovenia, where it's highly prominent, and even Austria. Is there any research on possibly moves to reduce the cost of that, to make it more effective, perhaps?
Well, there are a lot of animal vectored diseases that we now have effective vaccinations against that are offered to, for example, veterinarians and others, given that they're extremely rare. Tick-borne encephalitis is a terrible disease, and it's a universally vaccinated against disease in Korea, Japan, in many parts of the world. It's one of their recommended vaccinations. But because the rate of disease here is so low, we've not seen that. I don't know if some of the other, like St. Louis encephalitis and some of the other diseases that are transmitted by a zoonotic method, like tick-borne encephalitis, if they have vaccines against it or not. I know that Ebola they do. Again, we're not offered that because we're not in an Ebola zone, but that's a big breakthrough in West Africa and in Tanzania. You know, one of the things that I happen to have spent time in Korea, in Japan, and so I got vaccinated against tick-borne encephalitis because of that. Yeah, and if you're on a mission, if you're in the military, they'll provide that vaccination to you. Yellow fever is another one we don't see very often anymore, but there's still some countries that require that you're vaccinated prior to going there. If you're coming from Brazil, for example, and you go to Albania, they're going to want you to be vaccinated against a yellow fever.
Paul, thank you.
Thank you.